Hi there guys, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 14 Reviewed. I hope you're all enjoying this series as we creep further and further towards the present day. Don't worry though, there's still a long way to go. I don't have too much of an intro for this one really. Al Jean is well into his role as showrunner at this point, and he was also the executive producer for 21 of the 22 episodes this season, the other being done by Mike Scully. I guess that means we can expect more stuff like last season. A quick Wikipedia search also tells me that this season was well received and won some awards, which as we found out in season 12 doesn't mean a lot, but it's still worth a mention. I don't tend to agree with official critics much anyway, but it is what it is I guess. Anyway, as ever, a special thanks to the Simpsons Wiki for helping me out with the trivia, and with that said, let's move into the episodes. Season 14, Episode 1. Treehouse of Horror 13. The three short stories this year are Send in the Clones, The Fright to Creep and Scare Harms, and The Island of Dr. Hibbert. So some trivia about this Treehouse of Horror is that The Island of Dr. Hibbert is a parody of The Island of Dr. Moreau. My best moment was the Homer clones jumping off a cliff. So the season opener gets a 4 out of 5. So we have yet another Treehouse of Horror to begin a season, and as the rating suggests, I did enjoy this one. Part 1 had Homer cloning himself with a magic hammock. It was a simple enough premise, but it got the job done. What made the segment really work for me was all of the little references that they threw in. For example, one of the Homer clones the hammock created was Peter Griffin from Family Guy. That was a funny little moment and a good little jab at that show. I don't even mind Family Guy either, but there's nothing wrong with a little banter now, is there? Another clone created was the old version of Homer, and the classic old catchphrase of frosty chocolate milkshakes. These clever moments help make this segment enjoyable, and the ending of them all being lured off a cliff by donuts doesn't hurt either. Part 2 was an interesting one. Not that funny, but hey, there was a bit of drama going on. The concept of the entire town giving up their guns, only to be conquered by people with guns, is a concept that doesn't seem that fresh. The only difference here is that instead of people with guns, it is instead cowboy zombies who have come back from the dead. The segment was still alright though regardless. It managed to make a decent point about guns in an even-handed way. It does showcase that they can have a relevant role to play in terms of self-defense, but at the same time it is hinted at what could go wrong if they are misused. So yeah, a solid bit of satire here in this part, even if the humour was lacking. The final part on Dr. Hibbert's weird animal island was again quite interesting. I enjoyed seeing how all of the townspeople were as animals, and the animation during this story was also very good. I also liked Homer's scene in bed with the new cat Marge, as well as the final scene where he realizes that life would really be much better for him as an animal. There's not much else to this part really. I think the sinister demeanour that Dr. Hibbert had helped to sell the whole thing. To round off this episode, Part 1 was the pick of the bunch and is easily the most iconic of the three. The other two, while not being that funny or complex, still bring something to the table to keep me engaged. Overall, it was a good enough start to the year. Season 14, Episode 2, How I Spent My Strummer Vacation. After a drunken Homer is videotaped complaining about his family, they send him off to a rock and roll camp. So some trivia here is that when the Rolling Stones welcome everyone to rock and roll camp, they play the opening chords of their song Start Me Up. And my best moment was just Mick Jagger yelling, Simpson! This one is a 2 out of 5. The plot was just a bit weak here. Act 1 had Homer doing his typical thing of getting drunk, and from there, in what seemed like a totally unconnected way, his family send him off to a rock camp. I'm not sure I buy how enthusiastic Homer is at being a rock star. I mean, since when did he dream of becoming a musician? I know there used to be a running gag about Homer's dreams, but this doesn't seem to tie into that. Even ignoring that issue, the episode still seemed flat to me, with an over-reliance on guest stars. In fairness, the musicians do a decent job here. They were all totally fine with poking fun at themselves, and that did lead to a few amusing moments. As I said, I did enjoy Mick Jagger screaming Simpson at the top of his lungs, and just seeing the dumb things that the musicians got up to was a decent watch. The ending went a bit off the rails though, in my opinion. I mean, it is understandable that Homer wanted to have his moment. I just don't get why the rock and roll stars all attacked him in this fire-breathing vehicle of theirs. If all of this sounds incredibly wacky to you, then that is because it was. Mike Scully was the writer of this episode, and we all know he does love his wacky endings. He has pulled it off better in the past than he did here though. The main reason this gets a 2 is just the jokes. I found them to be well below par. I mean, as I said, there were a few good moments, especially with the musicians. And Homer making use of his all-access pass was kind of funny. However, that is by no means enough to keep a 22-minute episode enjoyable. Season 14, Episode 3, Bart vs. Lisa vs. the 3rd grade. After their results on a test are analysed, Bart is held back a grade and Lisa is skipped ahead. This leads to them being put in the same 3rd grade class. So a bit of a trivial reference here is that in Bart's daydream, Pikachu from Pokemon and Bender from Futurama can be seen. However, they are miscoloured compared to how they appear on those shows. My best moment was just Homer and Bart lounging around watching cable TV. So did I enjoy this episode as much as Lisa and Bart enjoyed being in a class together? No, I enjoyed it a lot more than that. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I never really remember this episode fondly, but I did enjoy it this time. Act 1 started off quite strong. Just seeing Homer and Bart laze around on the couch watching garbage cable TV was pretty fun. It also of course provides the reason of why Bart did so bad on his test. Let's be honest though, I don't think Bart really needs an extra reason to fail a test. The prospect of having both Lisa and Bart in the same class had potential, and although it never fully delivered, I still enjoyed seeing them together. Bart knowing all of the answers because he remembered them all from last year may not be that believable. I mean, did he really pay that close attention last year? But it does at least provide a challenge to Lisa's ego. Their trip to Capital City was fine, as was Bart's prank on Lisa at the flag unveiling. I was not so much on board with the ending though. Firstly, Lisa and Bart's fighting led to them falling down a bank at the side of the road. Okay, that is simple enough, but they apparently got lost from that. And they ended up running into a bunch of hillbillies who claimed to have been lost from field trips decades ago. At least in the end, with Bart and Lisa going back to where they were, the writers were aware of how status quo that is. I often have a problem with how the status quo is returned in an unconvincing way, but at least they made a joke out of it here. So overall, I thought the story, while it had flaws, was slightly above average. The jokes were also above average, which is why this episode just about gets to a 4. I liked Ned's eagerness in saying that he spends his money on religious pay-per-view, or as he likes to call it, pray-per-view. Then there is the buddy system which a 3rd grade teacher is foolish enough to rely on. No wonder Springfield Elementary loses so many kids, if that is how they check that everyone is there. Season 14, Episode 4, Large Marge. After Marge mistakenly receives breast implants, she embarks on a new career as a model. Meanwhile, Bart helps Krusty get his career back on track. So some trivia is that Large Marge was a character from the movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and that is where I assume that they got the title from. My best moment was Krusty playing a villain on Batman. This one is a 3 out of 5. This was a very up and down episode in my opinion. I actually didn't like the main plot that much. Marge getting botched surgery is one thing, but it never should have even happened in the first place. That is because Marge's reason for wanting liposuction was flimsy at best. She mistakenly thought that Homer was flirting, then after Manjula tells her that she is fat, she goes and gets surgery. It just all felt very forced. Also, of course it is understandable that she would get more attention after getting large boobs. I still think they went a bit overboard though in that regard. She does use them to distract the cops to save Homer, Bart and Milhouse though, so I guess that is something. Now onto the subplot. I actually enjoyed it more than the main one. Sure, Krusty being in trouble is nothing new, but there was a few good moments that I liked. The Batman show that Bart and Milhouse watched was great. Not only featuring Krusty as this lame villain, but also with Adam West returning to the show. Speaking of returning characters, it was nice to see the elephant Stampy back again too, a good little reminder of the classic era. Of course, Krusty couldn't even do his one job though, of remembering Stampy's safety word, so he had to get lucky by shouting Magumbos after Marge revealed herself. Much like Homer, it is typical of Krusty to get by anyway despite total incompetence. In terms of one other decent moment from the episode, I liked Frederick Tatum advertising some shoes. His forthrightness really was his undoing. Season 14, Episode 5, Helter Shelter. The Simpsons' house has a termite problem and must be exterminated for 6 months. The family temporarily move into a reality show home that is set in 1895. So this is the last aired episode to be traditionally inked and painted. After this, all episodes will be animated fully digitally. My best moment was the King of the Hill reference. I gave this episode a 1 out of 5. This is probably best described as a mess. So many of the decisions that they made here made no sense at all. It's not just a case of me not liking the execution, I generally could not figure out what they were going for at times. There's so many bizarre scenes which led to nothing, such as the family trying to find a new place to live, or the house being ridiculously dropped in a river. I think the main problem is that everything feels so forced. The premise itself of the family having to live in this reality show set in the past is not necessarily a bad one, but with the whole termites thing, it doesn't happen in a believable way. Then, once they do actually start living in their 1895 house, they just do the stereotypical roles from that time period. None of the characters have their own moments to shine, instead they are just slaves to the concept. Sure, there is a few jabs the show makes at reality TV shows, but is it really worth us enduring all this? Also, the ending is a total farce, but by that point I had already kind of zoned out. So many of the jokes fell flat here too. As I said, the King of the Hill reference was nice to see, with the whole time lapse that they did and a song playing in the background. And I did kind of like Maggie being drunk off the alcohol fumes at Moe's. The way she kind of harasses Bart is funny. That really is all of the positive things I can say about this though. Because not only was it bad, it was not even bad in an interesting way like many of the other episodes are from this era. Truly one of the most forgettable episodes so far. Season 14, Episode 6, The Great Louse Detective. The Simpsons hire Sideshow Bob to help them find out who keeps trying to kill Homer. My trivia for this one is that Lisa claims to not like children's author Dr. Seuss. However, in Lisa the Simpson, she considered his book Yertle the Turtle to be one of the greatest books ever written. And my best moment here was Bob talking to Apu about that time that he robbed the Quickie Mart. I gave this episode a 3 out of 5. The idea behind this one was actually pretty creative. It tried to touch on the backstories of both Sideshow Bob and Frank Grimes, while at the same time giving us a new look of Bob helping the Simpsons family. Sure, the way it all played out was very silly, with all of the swordfish museums and the stilts chase at the end. Regardless though, I was still on board with what was going on. The mystery of Homer's attempted killer was okay. They did throw in a few hints that it was the mechanic, and Frank Grimes Jr. does look enough like his father that fans could make the connection. Still, the many times that he tries and fails to kill Homer does make him look a bit pathetic, and as such takes away from the drama somewhat. I guess you could argue that it kind of mirrors Bob, in a way though, given how many times he has tried and failed to kill Bart, a fact which they mention numerous times in the episode. I don't know if the writers were going for that connection or not, but I think it's cool, so I'm going to pretend that they were. In terms of the ending to the episode, I was not a big fan of it really. Sure, it is nice to touch on the Frank Grimes story again, but if I'm honest, the revelation that he has a son didn't really add anything new. Also, Sideshow Bob not killing Bart because he had become accustomed to his face, that was kinda lame in my opinion. I mean, Bob's motivations had already been becoming a bit mushy even before this, so this certainly won't help clear that up going forward. If anything, it leaves me less interested in seeing more Bob episodes in the future. Onto the jokes now, and I thought they were a bit underwhelming. Bob being shocked got shown far too often, and the spa scene at the start was just flat out bad. I did at least enjoy the brief conversation that Bob had with Apu. Seeing them both reminisce with fondness about the events of Krusty Gets Busted was pretty good. That moment, along with the intrigue that the plot carried, added up to make this an okay episode overall. Season 14, Episode 7, Special Edna. Skinner constantly bails on his dates with Edna whenever his mother phones. Seeing this, Bart tries to make her feel appreciated by nominating her for Teacher of the Year. So a bit of information about this one is that the Epcot Center, the family visit, is a parody of the real-life Epcot Center at Disney World. My best moment was the ending. This one is a 4 out of 5. I did quite enjoy watching this. It worked in both the storytelling and humour department for me. It is about time that we really got to the bottom of Edna and Skinner's relationship. I have liked the episodes about them prior to this, but his mother was always kind of the elephant in the room the entire time. Agnes does come up with some funny lines now and again, but let's be real, she is an annoying character the vast majority of the time. And if I, as the viewer, find her annoying, then imagine how Edna must feel. Of course, Skinner deserves much of the blame, as this episode goes out of its way to show how he chooses his mum over everyone else. That angle got a bit repetitive as the episode went on, but hey, At least he finally did the right thing in the end. The way in which Skinner disregards his mother's objections and proposes to Edna was kind of sweet, and it was nice to see both of them, but especially Mrs. K, have a happy moment in the end. I would say though that the impact that moment has will lessen as the series goes on, given what happens to the couple after this. That is not the fault of this episode though, so taken purely as an individual story, it works pretty well. I also liked Bart's role throughout. He interacts well with both Mrs. Krabappel and Skinner. He also provides many of the episode's funny moments. I love the way in which he was thinking about Edna's potential suitors, with the song You Sexy Thing playing in the background. Some of the other jokes I found funny were the electric car ride paid for by the gasoline producers of America, as well as Homer saying, Michael Jackson just told me to shut up. In the end, this was an easy 4 rating, which only just missed out on being a 5. Season 14, Episode 8, The Dad Who Knew Too Little. After receiving an insensitive birthday gift, Lisa starts to realize how little Homer understands her. Homer hires private investigator Dexter Colt to find out her interests. So this is actually the second episode in the series to feature Lisa's 8th birthday, the first being Stark Raven Dad. And my favourite moment was Homer and Ned recording their personalised videos for Rod and Lisa. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. The plot here is a very typical one of Homer doing something which reminds Lisa of how little he actually knows about her. Then it is up to Homer to try and prove that he does really love her by doing the right thing in the end. If I sound slightly cynical about that, it's probably just because we get this type of dynamic so often. I am all for Homer and Lisa stories as they often turn out good, but after 14 seasons, I am starting to get a bit bored by the same story beats over and over again. Taking my mind off that though, and viewing this in a vacuum, the story is fine. It starts out with some fun scenes of Homer and Bart shopping at the mall. I liked Homer's rush to eat all of the free samples, and the cringy way in which he and Ned voice the videos is great. I laughed at how Ned apparently thinks that one of Rod's hobbies is diabetes. Once we get into the main crux of the story, which is about Homer hiring this detective fellow to follow Lisa around, it loses a bit of steam. I don't mind the detective character, as he does have some good banter with Homer, but still, not a lot ends up coming from it really. Homer gets to have one good day with Lisa after getting the information about her, but then they end up going on the run after Lisa gets framed for a crime. I was never really invested in any of that, and as such the ending kinda fell flat for me. Sure, Homer pushed Lisa away from the cannon shot, but that's not really enough to convince me that their relationship is fully on the mend. That slightly tame ending, along with the many jokes which don't land, make this an average episode overall. Season 14, Episode 9, The Strong Arms of Lamar. Marge develops agoraphobia after being mugged. She finds her confidence again through working out and decides to make a career of it. So this is the 300th episode of the show by airing order, and my best moment was the scene of Marge getting robbed. It may seem a bit of a dark moment to have as my favourite scene, but I think it worked well, as I'll explain in a minute. So, do I think the 300th episode of the show is a good one? No, not really. I gave this one a 2 out of 5 in the end. This is a doozy of an episode. Let's start off with the important things first. I like the concept of Marge getting robbed at gunpoint. It is rare for The Simpsons to show something serious like this happening to one of the main characters. It was treated seriously here as well. The scene after Marge gets her necklace stolen, where she just wanders back into the car with like a dazed look on her face before breaking down in front of the kids, is pretty hard hitting. To their credit, they do follow up on that too, as we get multiple scenes of Marge by herself in the basement, scared to go outside. You can really see how that event affected her, and the fact that she now has no pearls serves as a clever visual reminder of what happened. Because of this, it is totally understandable why she would get drawn to weightlifting after she found them in the basement, in what was a good callback to the intro scene of Reindeer Wolfcastle's garage sale. So yeah, we see Marge get her confidence back, and she even beats up her mugger when she runs into him again. All of that was good stuff, and it might even serve as good motivation for people who have gone through something like this in real life. So yeah, that was the first half of the episode. And given that I praised that first half so much and still gave this a 2, it probably says something about how bad the second half of this episode actually was. From nowhere, we transition into Marge taking steroids and becoming obsessed with strength contests. The problem here is that there is no real reason why Marge would do this. She had already gotten her attacker out of the way, so Liz's decision didn't seem to relate to that at all. Instead, she's suddenly addicted to steroids, which very few people could relate to. Then we get the infamous scene of Marge essentially raping Homer. Now, I'd hate to be one of those people who says, imagine what the reaction would be like if the roles were reversed. But, seriously, imagine if this was the other way around, and Homer was pinning Marge down to the bed, demanding sex. Obviously, that would be totally unacceptable, and the fact that this is played for laughs makes it all the worse. So yeah, that scene was kind of disgusting, and the bar fight at Moe's where Marge beats the crap out of everyone for no reason, that was almost as bad. And no, the last minute attempt at a happy ending does not make up for any of it. When all is said and done, this ends up being probably the most annoying episode of the show so far for me, because the first half was bang on the money, probably even a 5 standard to be honest, with the fine plot and nice little jokes. I especially like that Tetris game that Homer plays, when trying to fit all of the stuff that he brought into the car. The second half was just absolutely shocking though, probably zero territory if I'm being honest. I mean seriously, it was like bad Family Guy-esque. Exactly the type of thing you'd find in modern Family Guy. In the end I gave it a 2 because there was still some great stuff in here, but the bad stuff was so disturbingly bad that it makes the episode feel uncomfortable overall. Season 14, Episode 10, Pray Anything. After Homer suffers an injury at the church, he sues for damages. As a result of the trial, he is awarded the deed to the church. My trivia for this one is that Homer says he thought God only helped professional athletes and Grammy winners. But Homer, of course, is a Grammy winner, with the B-Sharps, as shown in Homer's Barbershop Quartet. My best moment was Homer singing I Was Made for Loving You in church. This one is a 3 out of 5. I quite enjoy the early parts of this episode, with Homer praying for every little thing because he thinks he can get whatever he wants from God. And even though it of course relied on coincidences, it still threw up a few good moments. The premise of Homer inheriting the church as compensation for an injury was an interesting one. On one hand, I feel like they could have done more from it, maybe get into how it affects the characters like Ned and Reverend Lovejoy a little more. On the other though, I did enjoy seeing Homer throw a wild party, and him singing a Kiss song in the church was a fine moment. The flood was kind of cliche though, and it did end in an unbelievable way. The problem with the whole flooding thing is that it was over and done with in a matter of minutes. The explanation we get for it was Lisa saying that it was Buddha, which was kind of a lame way to finish the episode. The jokes, much like the plot, were also a mixed bag. I did like some. Homer's antics throughout were reasonably funny, and I did like Carl praying to the hunting statue. I also liked Reverend Lovejoy's temporary service at the bowling alley. There were just as many gags which missed the mark though. Rod and Todd speaking in tongues never did anything for me, neither did the Noah's Ark reference. That was just far too obvious. I also didn't get what was going on with Moe here. He wanted to marry Gil at a basketball game, and even enjoyed Barney stripping in a game of strip poker. This kind of portrays him as having homosexual tendencies, which is not necessarily a bad thing by itself, but it's just kind of jarring because I can't recall ever seeing this kind of thing from Moe in the show before. That kind of sums this episode up for me. A few good moments mixed in with some that left me scratching my head. Season 14, Episode 11, Barting Over. When Bart discovers Homer exploited him as a baby in an advertisement, then stole all of the money, he is enraged and gets an emancipation. He moves into a loft, where he meets skateboarding legend Tony Hawk. So some trivia is that this episode was advertised to be the 300th episode of The Simpsons, but it was actually aired as the 302nd episode, and this fact is actually referenced in the episode itself, where Marge says, I could have sworn it was 302. The best moment for me was the reference to the real-life Butterfinger commercials starring Bart. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. The idea of this one on paper was decent, but the vibe I got from it just felt a bit off. I think the main reason for that is how Homer is portrayed here. It is made clear to us that Homer is the one fully in the wrong, because he spent all of Bart's commercial money on himself and didn't even plan to tell him about it. He is also seen strangling Bart on numerous occasions here, and even throws a tantrum in court when he does not get his way. After dealing with Homer's nonsense, it is understandable that Bart has gotten sick of it, and him moving out was an interesting idea, even if not entirely realistic. The best parts of the episode for me was just Marge and Lisa's reaction to him leaving. They are genuinely upset by the situation, and the regret that Bart has at leaving them behind is a good thing to showcase. I am more mixed on the skateboarding side of things though, as it did seem to come from nowhere, and felt like an excuse to have a Tony Hawk cameo. At least the Matrix-type battle that he has with Homer on his automatic skateboard was somewhat entertaining. The ending, much like the early stuff between Homer and Bart, fell flat though. Sure, Homer promises to buck his ideas up, but I'm not fully convinced by it. After all, he did just spend most of the episode being very bitter towards Bart. Also, Homer's commercial at the end, which he uses to pay Bart back, was not particularly funny and felt like a forced way to end the episode. Ultimately, the plot's execution just let it down. The comedy was also nothing special. As I said, I like the references to Bart's real-life commercials, and Marge's reaction to Bart's fake nipple rings was surprisingly funny. The way in which she screamed like Homer was rather unexpected. For every decent moment like those though, there were numerous ones which I just found completely unfunny. Season 14, Episode 12, I'm spelling as fast as I can. On the first day back to school, Lisa wins a spelling bee and is thrilled to be invited to the Spellimpics. Meanwhile, Homer chases after the new Krusty brand sandwich. So, the Rib Witch is an obvious parody of McDonald's McRib sandwich, which is also known for its intermittent availability. And the best moment for me was the Rib Witch commercial. This episode gets a 4 out of 5. Both the main and subplot here worked pretty well. Lisa being good at spelling is of course believable, as is her representing the school. In fact, that dynamic is so natural that I'm kind of surprised that it took the show this long to use it. It was good to see Lisa do well of course, but not only that, the town of Springfield is fully behind her here. It is good to see them all cheering her on, and I also love their justification for it. The town is so unsuccessful that Lisa going to the Spellimpics is the best claim to fame that they have. The ending was all about Lisa's morals being tested again, and of course she was never going to throw the contest, even if she probably should have done, to be honest. I mean, for someone like Lisa especially, free college is a very big deal. But I did like the twist where she spells a word wrong and loses the contest anyway. Lisa episodes are often a bit predictable, so I do like it when they throw a curveball in. It kind of reminds me of the season 10 episode, Lisa Gets an A, in that regard. Also, it does help that she still gets a happy ending, and the townspeople still respect her. The subplot of Homer chasing after the Rib Witch was also entertaining. He has quite a few good lines in the episode, and does come through for Lisa in the end, by selling the last Rib Witch to go and watch her compete. The jokes here were good, but not great I would say. That Rib Witch commercial was fantastic. You have Krusty's great line of, I don't mind the taste. In fairness, that is a lot more praise than he gives to most of his products. I also quite liked Lisa's reward of a scale model of Mars. It was just a dodgeball with the word Mars written on. There were a few lame jokes though too, such as the bees being released, or Otto shouting into Krusty's mouth because he thought he was a drive-through. There were a few too many moments like that for me to give this a 5. Still a good episode though. Season 14, Episode 13, A Star is Born Again. Ned Flanders has been lonesome since the loss of Maud. However, he forms a connection with a famous movie star who is visiting Springfield. My trivia for this episode is that James L. Brooks makes a cameo appearance. However, he is credited as Jim Brooks. And, well, my favourite thing about this episode is just the emotional things that Ned goes through. So, this one is a 3 out of 5. This is probably the best Ned story that we have got since Maud died, I would say. Now, admittedly, it is not exactly up against great competition, but still, it is a step back in the right direction for him. I think they handled him dating quite well. It helps that the build-up was good. We get to see a good few scenes of just how lonely he really is. Both at the Jellyfish Festival, then by himself at the Leftorium. It is nice to see that place again, by the way. The Leftorium is also where he first met Sarah, and surprisingly, they have a good amount of chemistry together. I think how they just kind of stumble into a relationship makes it more organic, and in a way the contrast between their personalities makes it even more engaging. They don't end up staying together in the end though, which is a bit of a shame honestly, and it also kind of lessens the impact of the previous scene. Overall though, it was still nice to see Ned act more normal for a change, and have his religious beliefs challenged in a meaningful way. So, I have praised this episode quite a bit so far, so you might ask why I didn't rate it higher. Well, there are two reasons for this. One, I did not find the episode that funny. There were a few okay moments at the beach in Act 1, but other than that, no laugh-worthy moments. The second reason is that there were a few bits which annoyed me. One is the constant use of the Benny Hill theme. It wouldn't matter so much if it was just a quick gag, but it was used a few times and it dragged on. I also disliked the gag of Homer leering at Sarah's boobs. It was just out of place, and again went on for too long. This episode is worth a watch for the story alone, but having seen it once, I will not be in a rush to go back and watch it again. Season 14, Episode 14, Mr. Spritz Goes to Washington. When the airline's flight path changes to over their house, the Simpsons start to get annoyed. They get Krusty to run for Congress to change it. So, the title of this episode is a parody of the film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which is also of course parodied in Mr. Lisa Goes to Washington. And the best moment for me here was just the family working together to get the bill passed in Congress. I just love all of the hoops they have to jump through to get this simple bill passed. This one is yet another 3 out of 5. The plot was a solid one, which goes along at a steady pace and standard all the way through. At first, we get to see a few scenes of just how bad it really is for the family to have planes fly over the house 24/7. It is of course totally understandable that they are driven mad by it, and it kind of makes you want them to succeed in getting things back to normal. The way they go about things is very random though. They decided to get Krusty of all people to run for Congress, which not only felt a bit forced, it also borrows material from earlier on in the show, namely the episode Sideshow Bob Roberts, where he becomes the mayor and builds an expressway over the Simpsons' house. Once we get to the halfway point in this episode, it becomes mostly a political satire about how useless Congress is and about how corrupt the American government is in general. In typical Simpsons fashion, it also gets stuck into Fox by making a mockery of Fox News. I very much liked the bar that went by, saying things like 92% of Democrats are gay, or JFK posthumously joins the Republican Party. The general tone that this episode takes towards politics is very cynical in nature, and although I did not like everything that they tried, overall I was still on board with that sentiment. I myself am someone who is very cynical and, dare I say, dismissive towards mainstream politics. So I understand that the approach that they took here probably works better with me than it would with people who are deeply invested in some kind of political party. But despite me enjoying most of the main plot, the episode was still only average for me. The ending was very status quo, and other than those few jabs at Fox that I mentioned, the episode was not that funny. Season 14, Episode 15, C.E.Do. Homer makes some suggestions to improve safety at the power plant. When Mr. Burns ignores Homer's proposals, he and Lisa devise a plan to take the plant. So some trivia is that the scene where Ned Flanders stares at Homer and Marge at night with his cigar lit is a parody of Rear Window. My best moment was Homer running the power plant. This episode is a 5 out of 5. This was just an interesting plot that has numerous good gags scattered throughout. I liked how just by buying a motivational book, Homer suddenly had the motivation to try and better himself and achieve big things. And I guess it doesn't come much bigger than taking over the plant. That side of things could have become silly, but I think that it was structured quite well and had some nice moments. Homer was actually shown to be working hard trying to run the plant, which was nice to see, even if it didn't quite work out for him in the end. The ending to this episode I'm kind of mixed on. Mr. Burns fires a sleeping dart at Homer, then tries to seal him in his tomb. That was a bit silly and over the top, but I kind of like how he only sealed about 2 bricks high before Homer wakes up. The way in which Homer puts a blanket over him in pity was strangely a nice moment. It kind of goes to show that, sure, Mr. Burns is evil, but he's still just a frail old man at the end of the day. As I alluded to, the jokes were a major plus here. I found a fair few of them funny. I liked Maggie dancing along to Sex Bomb after Homer got the tapes mixed up. The chart Mr. Burns had not only showing the canary on the top, but Homer at the very bottom below the carbon rod. That was a great little reference to Deep Space Homer. You also had the scene of Homer throwing Mr. Burns off the plant balcony after he took over, then deciding that he wanted to go crowd surfing himself. That may or may not have been a reference to Homer's Odyssey, I'm not really sure. The intro to this episode was also an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon, which I was happy to see. We have not got enough of those two lately. So yeah, the plot was engaging, and the jokes were the best of the season so far. What more can I ask for? Season 14, Episode 16, Excuse Me While I Miss the Sky. After Declan Desmond convinces Lisa that her life lacks direction, she gets into astronomy. Her first aim is to tackle the city's light pollution. Meanwhile, Bart is out to steal a hood ornament to impress the bullies. So a fun fact is that the hood ornament on Fat Tony's mob car is actually an Emmy award. The best bit for me was Declan Desmond's documentary. This one gets a 4 out of 5 from me. This episode technically has two main plots, one focusing on Bart and the other focusing on Lisa. They both ended up coming together in the end though, as Lisa and Bart both wanted to get rid of the nighttime lights. It was Declan Desmond who kicked it all off though, after he came to school and made his doc. This is Declan's first appearance in the show, and I very much liked him here. He adds some personality, and is played very well by Eric Idle. It is just the snobby way in which he interacts with people that I like. He really is a great character foil for pretty much anyone. The writers must have felt the same way, as they bring the character back several more times in the future. Even though things do get a bit uneven towards the end of this episode, there is at least always a lot of things going on, which ensured that I never got bored. The jokes here were also okay. I liked the one of Moe and Selma kissing. It's kind of too bad that we never got to see them as a couple. The poxy looking Fox satellite was also quite funny. The show really is going in hard on Fox in these last two episodes, aren't they? There were enough good moments like those to prop this one up to being a good episode. Season 14, Episode 17, Three Gays of the Condo. After Homer and Marge have a fight, Homer chooses to leave the house. After initially struggling to find a good roommate, he eventually moves in with two gay guys. So my trivia here relates to Weird Al's appearance, and his original line in the credits was going to be, "Oh yeah, we've got time to fill, so why don't you go pee before King of the Hill?" However, this line was changed when King of the Hill was moved to an earlier time slot. My best moment was just the family doing the jigsaw. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. I liked how most of Act 1 here was just about the family working together to build this giant jigsaw. Seeing how passionate they get about it was kind of endearing, and it was a nice change to have the family all on the same page for once. That didn't last for long though, because we soon moved into a Homer and Marge marriage crisis plot. Now I have said before that this is an overused plot point on the show, and as such it has to bring something different to the table to get me to like it, and I don't think that this one really did. For a start, the misfeeling Homer and Marge have for each other felt really contrived. Sure, Homer found this old thing Marge wrote about him, but who really cares? They have still been married for over a decade after that. Also, when Homer brought it up with Marge, she couldn't just clearly say that she still loves him, oh no. The plot has to happen after all, so we have to wait until the end of the episode to get that. Instead, she kind of gives off the impression that she still is angry with him. So because I think that the starting point is unconvincing, it meant that I was not on board with the rest of it. Not like it really mattered though, because it all played out in a predictable way anyway. The Weird Al Yankovic cameo that we got here was also a tad disappointing to me. I quite like Weird Al normally, but he felt a bit forced here, and his cameo appearance didn't really add anything to the episode. Onto a slightly more positive thing, the episode was pretty entertaining. The time that Homer spends with the gay guys was fine, and the way he just jumps out the window after being kissed was rather amusing. Homer running into Smithers in the gay part of town was also quite good, with just how awkward the situation was for Smithers. I also liked the joke with Abe and Maggie leaving in disgust, because the family said that the jigsaw was only for people between the ages of 8 and 80. So despite my annoyance with the Homer and Marge stuff, those good moments turn the episode into something decent. Season 14, Episode 18, Dude, Where's My Ranch? Homer pens a tune called Everybody Hates Ned Flanders, which brings him massive success. When the popularity becomes unbearable, the family go on vacation to a ranch. So some trivia is that when Cleany says "my precious," it is of course a reference to Gollum from Lord of the Rings. Cleany was even voiced by Andy Serkis, Gollum's voice actor. My best moment was the Everybody Hates Ned Flanders song. This one is a 3 out of 5. This is another episode which has some good and some bad parts, which balance out to be a 3. I like how their trip to the ranch was all prompted by wanting to get away from Homer's song after it had been played to death. I understand why it did catch on though. It was quite catchy, and actually did a really good job of roasting poor Ned. I don't feel too bad for him though, as he took it in his typical good spirit, even singing along to the song in his car. I also like how on the way to the ranch, the music guy gets captured by Moe. At first you think it's going to go in kind of a dark direction, but it is all resolved in the end with the song that he produces for Moe. The Moe Moe Moe, why don't you like me, nobody likes me. That got a laugh out of me. I'm not as big a fan of the stuff when they actually get to the ranch though. Bart and Homer had this tacked on story where they try and get rid of a beaver dam, and Lisa fell in love with a boy. You know, it kind of irritated me how she kept referring to it as her first crush. I mean, we know this show is light on continuity, but still, it is so obviously not her first crush. I think she's had numerous ones by this point, the biggest one probably being Nelson. It didn't help that their relationship, if you can call it that, was not really built on that much. There was that scene of them hanging out together, sure, but obviously given the age difference there was no real connection there. Also, Lisa sending the guy's sister off down a dangerous path just because she got jealous was a horrible thing to do, and she rightly got called out on it in the end. It was just a very up and down episode which is becoming a trend in this season. Season 14, Episode 19, Old Yellow Belly. When a fire engulfs Bart's new treehouse, Homer becomes trapped. Santa's little helper fails to help, leaving Snowball 2 to rescue him instead. Homer starts to hate the dog as a result, but has second thoughts when Santa's little helper becomes a mascot for Duff. So this is actually the second episode where Santa's little helper chooses to rescue food from a fire over Homer. The first occasion of this was in Homer the Heretic. The best part of the episode for me was Snowball 2 saving Homer. So, this episode is a 2 out of 5 in my opinion. Act 1 of this was decent. The Amish rebuilding the treehouse with the faulty wiring that led to the fire was kind of appropriate, let's be honest. It was also nice to see Snowball 2 get some airtime, as the cat is very rarely seen in a major role on the show. I do like how everyone treats her like a god after it. Moe even lets her sit in his food for crying out loud. After that runs its course though, the plot seems to drift by without having any real point. Santa's little helper becoming the Duff mascot never did much for me, and the ending where they tried to get Duffman to save Homer was a bit lame. The shark getting drunk instead of attacking Homer was not only dumb, I could also see it coming from a mile away. I really don't have anything else to say about this episode, there's just not much there to talk about. Season 14, Episode 20, Break My Wife, Please. Homer loses his driver's license, and Marge is forced to drive him around town. She gets furious when she has to chauffeur his friends, too. So, the name of this episode refers to Henry Youngman's line, "Take my wife, please." The best moment here was Homer doing the Mexican hat dance. This episode got a 2 out of 5. The story here was just incredibly disjointed. Seriously, 1 minute it focuses on Homer losing his license, then Marge getting stressed about doing all of the driving, then finally about Homer doing more walking. Then all of those stories just got abandoned as we moved into yet more Homer and Marge marriage problems. Oh goody. I don't even like the way that Marge acts throughout the episode. I mean, sure, she's under pressure from driving her family around, but that hardly excuses some of her behaviour here. She literally runs Homer over on purpose, then kicks his cane out from underneath him when he is recovering. Again, none of it's played for laughs, so I can only assume that this is meant to be taken at least somewhat seriously. Then, even after all she did, the episode still tries to treat Homer as if he is the one in the wrong. Look, I get it. Homer does take advantage of Marge at times, and is perhaps not as grateful as he should be for all of the things that she does. But it's not even like he did anything that bad in this episode. And to even begin to make Marge's actions look understandable, he would have to have done something really bad. This episode doesn't do logic like that though, so instead we end on Homer throwing this big party for Marge, and apparently all is well again. This was just a bad plot, that gets even dumber the longer it goes on. As for the jokes, some went on far too long, like Homer at the video store, but there were some good ones too. Homer dancing around his cell phone as it plays a Mexican hat dance was quite fun, as were the lyrics he made up on the spot. I also did like Homer telling everyone to get the hell out of his yard after the party. Season 14, Episode 21, The Bart of War. Bart and Milhouse are caught wreaking havoc in Ned Flanders' home. In an effort to keep him off the streets, Marge enrolls Bart into the preteen Braves. So the title is a reference to The Art of War by Sun Tzu. My best moment was Ned's panic room. This episode got a 3 rating. I liked at the start of this episode the best. Seeing Bart and Milhouse get up to mischief in Flanders' house is intriguing, just because we rarely get to see a good look inside his home. It is also nice information to know that Ned has a large Beatles collection, or at least he did have, until Bart and Milhouse wrecked most of it. I also did like that panic room that Ned had, with all of the multiple extravagant locks, and that button that calls the police. Let's just hope that that criminal doesn't have a blowtorch or poison gas injector though. The punishment the kids get for ransacking Ned's home seems a bit mild though. It seems like Bart has been punished more for doing much less in the past. Here, all that happens is that he joins a nature group with some other kids. I was not that invested in the rivalry aspect that developed between Bart's group and Milhouse's group, but it did have Homer and Kirk being the scout leaders, so that is always cool. The ending was very lackluster though. Springfield just erupts in another pointless riot that really didn't fit the episode at all. I also didn't buy Marge crying. It felt like a desperate attempt to tie some emotion to the story, when there wasn't really any there to begin with. Even though the plot went downhill, the jokes were decent throughout. I did like the Beatles references they threw in, like the Yellow Submarine and the visions of Yoko Ono. I also enjoyed the little South Park parody they did. It was nothing too in-depth, but just seeing South Park portrayed on The Simpsons was interesting. After Nelson went off hugging a tree thinking that it was his father, Marge's line of, "I can see why he left," was also funny because I just didn't expect Marge to come out with that. She really does have a savage side to her this season, doesn't she? Season 14, Episode 22, Moe Baby Blues. Moe, feeling lonesome, attempts to commit suicide. However, he unintentionally saves Maggie's life. Seeing that Maggie has taken a liking to him, Marge invites Moe around to look after her. So, some trivia is that Hank Azaria won an Emmy Award in the Outstanding Voiceover Performance category for his role as Moe in this episode. The best moment, or moments here for me, was Moe babysitting Maggie. The season finale gets a glorious 5 out of 5. This is a very well done plot. I think it manages to get the balance just right with Moe. Of course we get to see how depressed he is at the start, but we know with him that he does want to live a happy life deep down. So having Maggie literally drop into his arms of course gave him that sense of meaning. Not sure how realistic it is for Maggie to be flung out of the car in that way, but hey, it does the job of setting up the plot, so I'm not complaining. The subsequent scenes we get of them spending time together are great. Even though Maggie is still a baby, they do a good job of showing how they bonded. Moe's personality actually works really well with her. As he mentions, she doesn't understand the awkward things he says, but she does understand the funny things that he does. It is just such a Moe thing to do to dislocate his arm as a gag, or destroying Nelson's bumper car with a wrench because he bumped them too hard. As we all know, Maggie does have this type of destructive streak in her, so it makes perfect sense that she enjoys it all. Not to mention the Godfather type stories that he tells her, which are just great. They even managed to tie it in with the mafia standoff ending. Not only did the story manage to provide some genuine emotion with Maggie and Moe, it also again shined the light on Homer's parenting skills. The argument that Homer has with Moe is fantastic because both of them kind of have a point. Homer was right that Moe was becoming obsessive and overly protective of Maggie, but Moe was right in that Homer only seemed to care about Maggie when someone else was spending time with her. These kind of feelings are very human and really do help to bring their characterization to another level. Another good thing about this episode is the animation. It was always giving us some new looks. It had many cool lighting changes, such as at the plant festival and when Homer and Marge thought that Moe had kidnapped Maggie. It helped add to the immersion of what was already an interesting story. In terms of the jokes, they were okay. Act 1 had a few lazy ones, such as Lisa pointing out the sign, but it did get better as the episode went on. I liked that Alice in Wonderland gag, and the scene of Moe with the woman in Krusty Burger. All in all, this is perhaps the best story since the classic era. I'm not quite convinced that it is the best overall episode since, as Act 1 was not quite as good as Act 2 and 3, and it was not the funniest thing ever. Still though, it was the best episode of the season in my opinion, and a fun way to end it. So that is all the season 14 episodes reviewed, and here is a season summary. The overall average score for this season is 3.1, and that is exactly the same as last season. In fact, if you add up all of the scores that the episodes got, I think it is literally the same as last year. I didn't plan for that to be the case, but it just worked out that way. So let's take a look at the best and worst episodes of the season. In terms of my bottom 5, Old Yellow Belly came in 5th, How I Spent My Strummer Vacation came in 4th, Break My Wife Please came in 3rd, The Strong Arms of Lamar came in 2nd, and Helter Shelter was the worst of the year. In terms of the top 5 episodes, there were only 7 for better episodes in the season, so obviously that meant that 2 had to miss out. So I think it's only fair that I give the Treehouse of Horror episode and Bart vs Lisa vs the 3rd grade an honourable mention. Now on to the top 5. Excuse Me While I Miss the Sky was 5th, I'm Spelling As Fast As I Can was 4, Special Edna was 3rd, C.E. Doe was 2nd, and Moe Baby Blues was the best. Now, this might be deja vu all over again, but I think this season is a meh season, and is very comparable to both season 12 and 13. That does mean that we are continuing to see a consistent standard on show, which is hovering around the 3 mark. It may not be setting the world alight, but honestly, as long as it doesn't get any worse than this, I'm happy. We haven't reverted back to season 11 standard. Well, not yet anyway. We'll have to see how season 15 fares next time. But if I had to weigh this one up compared to the previous 2 seasons, I think season 12 is definitely better than this one, and season 13 I'd probably give a slight edge to as well. Despite the fact that the scores were exactly the same, season 13 just felt a bit better to me. I don't know why, but it just did. In terms of what actually went on in this season, it dialed back the more criminal side of things from last year, and instead tried to put the characters into different situations. Episodes like Helter Shelter, Bart vs. XIII vs. the Third Grade, 3 Gays of the Condo, and Dude Where's My Ranch all had family members staying somewhere different for an extended period of time. It was a refreshing thing for them to try. There is no point in seeing them inside the 4 walls of Evergreen Terrace all the time. That being said though, the execution was often lacking. There was a tendency to make these new residences more about the gimmick than seeing how the family members genuinely reacted to it. That was of course shown at its worst in Helter Shelter. In terms of the characters, there is nothing too notable to say about Homer, Bart or Lisa, but Marge is a whole nother story. She seemed to be far more on edge this season, and I noticed that many of her lines had more bite to them than we are used to seeing from her. Then you have the 2 episodes, Break My Wife Please and Strong Arm of the Ma. In both of those, Marge is actively trying to harm Homer, which really doesn't make for good viewing. If Homer were acting even half as bad as this, then make no mistake about it, I would be calling him Jerk-Ass Homer. I guess what I'm saying is that Jerk-Ass Marge appears for the first real time in this season, and it's really off-putting. I don't want to see it again. Let's just hope that she calms down a bit for next season. I want to touch on a few side characters briefly too. Cletus is a real winner from this season if you take into account how often he appears. If you're paying attention, you will notice that in literally half of the episodes here, he has some kind of line or cameo. It frankly gets a bit much. I don't mind Cletus, but I also don't need to see him every other episode. Moe is the other interesting one. For most of the season, I actually didn't like his characterization. He seemed to walk this uneasy line of being an edgy criminal and a depressed, awkward, pathetic man. At least Moe's Baby Blues goes some way to rescuing the situation though, and made up for much of my grievances. Anyway, that's about all I have to say for this one guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please feel free to click that like button. Thanks for watching guys, and as always, take care.